My neighbor had a key to my apartment. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and this happened last year when I was living alone for the first time. I'd just moved into a small studio apartment in downtown Seattle after landing my first real job. The building was old, thin walls, creaky floors, drafty windows, but affordable and in a decent location. My books were slightly rearranged. A mug I'd left in the cabinet appeared in the drying rack. As I moved through the apartment, I noticed a smell, something sweet and chemical. Like cologne I didn't use. The lights were off, the door locked. Everything appeared normal, but the scent lingered. I barely slept the rest of the night. I sensed it to my phone and checked it during work. For a few days, nothing happened. I started to feel like I was being paranoid. Maybe I just needed more sleep. But I left the camera running anyway. My laptop, always left open, was closed one day when I came home. Nothing was stolen. Nothing obvious. It had already been opened. Not torn, but cleanly sliced open and resealed. Another one had the same thing. Then he slowly walked to my closet, ran his hand along my shirts, and picked up one I'd worn that day. He pressed it to his face and smelled it. After a moment, he turned and walked out, locking the door behind him. The video showed my front door opening, no sign of forced entry. A man stepped inside casually, like he belonged there. It was Walter. One package had a book I'd ordered about home security. Someone had dog-eared specific pages, ones about lockpicking. My stomach dropped. He opened my medicine cabinet, checked the labels. Then he moved into the sleeping area. The camera caught him standing near my bed. No answer. Eventually, he used his key. A few minutes later, he came back looking shaken. He told me Walter's apartment was empty. No furniture, no dishes, no bed, just bare floors and dust. The kitchen looked untouched. There was no sign of anyone living there, not even utilities set up. I was there, asleep. Just 10 feet away. Turns out Walter had been on a month-to-month lease. But the payments had been coming in by mail, with no phone number or email listed. The rent checks were from a generic PO box. Maintenance said they hadn't entered 3 years, and no one had ever submitted repair requests or been let in. Just off enough to make me question whether I was losing my mind or if someone had actually been in my apartment. I didn't want to deal with police or press charges. I just wanted to be safe again. But the image of Walter standing in my room, that still lives in my head. Maybe Walter wasn't even his real name. Maybe he'd never truly lived there at all, just drifted from unit to unit. Staying invisible, staying quiet. I don't have answers, but I've changed all my locks. Installed cameras in every room, and I never sleep without checking them twice. I sent him the footage. His tone changed immediately. He said he'd change the locks that day and look into who else might have a copy. They were reporting strange smells, items moved, and open packages. They'd even gotten footage of someone entering their unit at night. The face in the video was Walter. I lived in Unit 3B, and the guy next door in 3A introduced himself the day I moved in. His name was Walter. Mid-40s, balding, thick glasses, wore the same brown cardigan every time I saw him. He seemed friendly enough, a little too interested maybe, but I didn't think much of it. He knocked for several more minutes before leaving. When I looked again, the plate was sitting on my doormat. I didn't touch it. He said he'd lived there for over 10 years and knew the place inside out. Chocolate chip, your favorite. The first time something felt off was about 3 weeks in. I have a habit of placing my toothbrush in the holder with the handle facing a specific way. I live alone. Nobody else should be touching it, but one morning, I found it in the sink wet. Like someone had just used it. I brushed it off as a fluke. Maybe I knocked it over the night before and forgot. But a week later, it happened again. He gave me this too wide grin and said, "Sleeping all right, Ryan?" I froze. I hadn't spoken to him since move-in day, and I definitely hadn't reminded him of my name. He kept talking. "I hear you tossing and turning sometimes. These walls, man. Paper thin." I mumbled something and slipped past him, but the niece stayed with me. His unit was supposed to mirror mine, his bedroom on the opposite side of the building. He shouldn't have been able to hear anything. This time I was sure I hadn't touched it. I'd even made a mental note of its position the night before. Yet again, it was lying damp in the sink. After that, I started noticing small things. One night around 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. The next day, I ran into Walter in the hallway. That weekend, I ordered a mini security camera online and set it up on my bookshelf facing the apartment door. Then one afternoon, I went to the building's mail room to pick up a package. 3 nights later, the camera sent me a motion alert at 2:34 a.m. My heart was racing as I opened the app. He walked straight into the bathroom, picked up my toothbrush, turned it over in his hand, and set it in the sink. He didn't touch anything else. He just stood there watching. I didn't sleep again that night. At sunrise, I called the landlord. I told him what happened and demanded to know who had keys to my unit. He insisted only he and maintenance had access. At around 10 a.m., before the locksmith arrived, I heard a knock. It was Walter. I checked the peephole. He was holding a plate of cookies. "Ryan," he called, "I made these for you." My blood went cold. I had never told him that. I didn't answer. That afternoon, the landlord went to confront him. I waited inside as he knocked on 3A. The landlord started digging into rental records. I moved out within the week and stayed with a friend until I found a new place. Last week, I got a call from my old landlord. A new tenant had moved into 3B. It's possible someone's squatting in the building using stolen keys, because some people don't break in, they slide in through the cracks you don't even realize are there. She watched me through her blinds every night. My name is Nathan Reynolds, and this happened last year when I moved into my first apartment alone. It was a small studio in an older brick building near downtown. Nothing fancy, just 3 floors and about 20 units, but it was mine. I was 23, fresh out of college, and had just landed a full-time job. It felt like a fresh start. I lived on the first floor in apartment 1B. Above me in 2B was a woman the super introduced once as Mrs. Holloway. She was probably in her 60s, always wearing faded floral dresses. The kind your grandmother might wear around the house. We never really talked, just exchanged polite smiles when we passed in the hallway. One evening I came home to find a Christmas card on the floor just inside my apartment. I figured someone had slipped it under the door while I was at work. Seemed harmless enough. But when I opened it, there was a photo inside, a photo of me, sitting at my desk. Taken from the outside through my window. Maybe she didn't mean harm. Still, I started to feel trapped in my own home. My blinds stayed shut all the time. I moved my desk away from the window. It was a few months old. I was wearing a Star Wars shirt I hadn't worn since early fall. For a while, everything felt normal. I'd come home from work, make something quick to eat, and either watch TV or play games. Inside were dozens of photos, some taken through my window, others clearly taken from inside my apartment. Pictures of me sleeping, eating, changing clothes. Photos of my closet, my drawers, my bathroom. As I approached the building, I noticed that the window above my Mrs. Holloway's was dark for once. I checked every window. Sure enough, the bedroom latch was broken. I called the police immediately. "Nathan, don't be upset. I just wanted to take care of you. You remind me of my son." But when I got to my door, she was already standing there, in the hallway. Sometimes I worked remotely, and I'd set up at the small desk by the back window where the natural light was best. The landlord tried to charge me for breaking the lease, but once I mentioned the window and the police report, he didn't argue. Around mid-October, I started getting this strange feeling at night. I keep my blinds shut, even during the day. Since then, she'd been fixated on finding replacements, young men who reminded her of him. She'd done this before. Other buildings, other tenants. Sometimes she was institutionalized for a while, but always released eventually. No criminal record serious enough to keep her locked away. The kind that crawls up your spine when you sense you're not alone. I started finding small gifts left outside my door. A scarf, a tin of cookies, a used astronomy book. Everyone came with a handwritten note, always signed to your friend upstairs. That phrase started to make my stomach turn. I know it's probably nothing. Her expression was odd, smiling, but vacant. She stepped forward and said, "I've been waiting for you." Her voice was softer and more childlike than I expected. Something about it made me freeze. Over the next few nights, I kept sensing it. Sometimes I'd catch her blinds parting slightly, and then quickly closing again. Problem solved, or so I thought. But even with them shut, the feeling of being watched lingered. I started noticing footsteps above me late at night. Not just regular walking, but slow, deliberate pacing. I was just making sure you were safe. My heart nearly stopped. I remembered the latch being loose when I moved in, but I'd never fixed it. Maintenance never came when I reported it, and I stopped thinking about it. I lived on the first floor. I figured it didn't matter. Like someone was trying to align themselves with where I was in my apartment. I tried ignoring it. I told myself it was just my imagination or coincidence. But it started to feel too deliberate. He laughed it off, said maybe the lady upstairs had trouble sleeping. We both shrugged it off until we heard the pacing again, and it stopped right above where we were sitting. I remember glancing up from my laptop and thinking I saw movement in the window above mine, just a brief shift between the blinds, like someone was watching. When I looked directly, the blinds closed quickly. I brushed it off. Probably nothing, maybe she was looking outside, but that uneasy feeling didn't go away. Eventually, I began closing my own blinds at night. I mentioned it once to my friend Jake when he came over for a football game. Then came December. The card simply read, "Merry Christmas, Nathan, from your friend upstairs." I never told her my name. That should have been the moment I called someone, but I hesitated. I kept thinking maybe she was just lonely. Over the following weeks, it got worse. In January, things hit a breaking point. I'd been out late at a company party and came back around 2 a.m. She was in a thin nightgown, holding something behind her back. She handed me an old photo album. I didn't want to take it, but she kept pushing it into my hands. I opened it out of instinct. That's when I realized she'd been in my apartment. I asked her how she got inside. She smiled wider and said, "Your bedroom window doesn't lock properly." I shoved past her, slammed the door, and shoved a chair under the knob. While I waited, I could hear her outside the door, knocking softly, whispering my name. The police arrived and took her away. She didn't resist. Later, I learned she'd lost her son in a war 10 years earlier. I moved out that same week. Stayed with Jake until I found another place. I live on the top floor now, in a newer building with actual security. But I still check every window before bed. And every now and then, when I'm working late at my desk, I feel that same prickling on the back of my neck, but I still turn around just in case. They said the unit next door was empty. My name is Jordan Hale, and I moved into Unit 4B of the Grovewood Apartments last fall. The building was old, 3 stories, red brick, and tucked behind a row of trees that blocked most of the street noise. Rent was surprisingly affordable for the area, which should have been a red flag. But I was 26, recently laid off from a retail job, and desperate to get out of my parents' place. I figured I'd be fine for a few months while I looked for steady work again. Cheap and quiet sounded like a win. By the end of the first week, though, I started hearing things from the unit next door. Not loud, just a steady pacing. Soft footsteps, late at night, always between midnight and 3 a.m. At first, I thought maybe someone had moved into 4A and no one told me, but the landlord insisted it was still empty. Sound travels weird in these old places. I wasn't scared, just tired. Constant interrupted sleep was taking a toll. The landlord, Mr. Garrison, was a short, jittery man with too many keys on his belt. It wasn't distant like from another floor. It was right on the other side of my wall, next to where I slept. Maybe a squatter or someone hiding out. It made sense. Quiet building, an attentive landlord, no regular checks. I emailed Mr. Garrison again asking if he'd physically been inside for a recently. He said he had just a few days prior. No one's been in there, he insisted. During the walkthrough, he mentioned that the unit next to mine, had been vacant for a while. But the next night, it came back and louder. I was exhausted, fed up, and decided to go into the hallway. I put on a hoodie, slipped outside, and walked to the door of 4A. No lights. I leaned close and heard the pacing again. Then the dragging. Then a long, rattling cough. When I returned, there was a sheet of paper under my door. No writing, just a faint reddish smudge in the corner. Looked like blood. Like whoever it was didn't appreciate being interrupted. He locked it back up and left in a hurry. People like upper floors more, he said. Less foot traffic. It was a woman in her late 50s. Said her mother used to live in for Mrs. Chen. She'd died there the year before after weeks of refusing medical help. She'd lived alone, with no family visiting until it was too late. But I still can't sleep if I hear coughing through a wall. Even in hotels. I carry earplugs, just in case. The daughter asked if I'd heard anything. She said she sometimes felt like her mother never really left. Now I heard scratching, tapping, like someone was trying to dig through the wall. The coughing returned around 3 a.m. and lasted nearly 2 hours. I turned up music, tried to drown it out. Left the key in the mailbox and stopped returning calls from the landlord. My place was small living area, kitchenette, bathroom, and a narrow bedroom, but it got great light during the day. The first few nights were fine. A little creaking here and there, but that's normal in all buildings. He stalled at first, then finally agreed to meet me there. When he opened the door to 4A, the air hit us like a wall, stale, thick, damp. The place was empty, but not clean. Dust everywhere. A single metal chair in the center of the living room. No bed, no signs of life. Just one thing stood out, a bundle of used tissues and a bottle of expired cough syrup in the corner. And did something I probably shouldn't have. I slid a folded piece of paper under the door. One sentence, and whoever it was didn't want me to know they were in there. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob. It was locked, and strangely cold to the touch. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been, like the apartment hadn't been heated in a long time. I tried to ignore it. Maybe the noise was coming from the unit above or below and bouncing through the walls in weird ways. But I knew what footsteps through a shared wall sounded like. The pacing was too consistent, always at the same times, same pattern. A slow walk across the floor, pause, turn, repeat. Sometimes there was a dragging sound, like a chair being moved just a few inches at a time. I knocked on the wall once, just out of frustration. The pacing stopped for the rest of the night. I asked Mr. Garrison again. He got defensive. I told you already, nobody's in there, he said. You're probably just hearing pipes or something. I let it go, but I started writing down the noises, times, patterns, any changes. Then came the coughing. It started off soft like someone with a lingering cold, but it got worse. Every night, wet, heavy coughing that sounded painful. Sometimes it would last for an hour. I began to suspect someone might have broken into the empty unit. I didn't believe him. One night around 2:30 a.m., the coughing started up again, louder and more labored than before. I knocked. It stopped instantly. I stayed there for a full minute, listening to silence, back in my unit. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that coughing. It didn't sound fake. The next morning, I went back into the hall. If you need help, leave a note under my door. I left for a few hours that afternoon to clear my head. I called Mr. Garrison again and demanded he open the apartment. You said you checked this place, I asked Mr. Garrison didn't answer. He just looked pale and shook his head. That night, the sounds didn't stop, they got worse. A few days later, I got a knock on my door. I didn't answer. I just closed the door politely, I moved out 2 weeks later. Didn't break the lease, just left. Now I live in a newer building. Top floor, no shared walls, because whether it was memory, guilt, or something else, I don't think those sounds in for B ever stopped.